All cameras, no matter what they look like, what they are used for, or how much they cost, are based on the same scientific principle. And it's a very simple idea to understand. A camera is simply a mechanical version of the human eye, and it works in exactly the same fashion. It shares 4 pieces of hardware that are fundamental to our human sight. That is, it has a lens, the cornea, a shutter, the eyelid, an aperture, the iris, and a capture medium at the back, a digital sensor, which is like the retina. The difference between a still camera and our eye is that the eye continually records milliseconds of still information and transfers it to the brain at an accelerated rate, much like a movie camera does. But how is it that what we see evolving in front of our eyes gets transmitted onto our eyes or into our cameras? How is it that we can transfer that information and make a picture? A photograph is made as a consequence of exposing a light-sensitive medium to light. In the old days, the light-sensitive material was called film, but now we expose a digital sensor to light to create our photograph. The result of the process of making an exposure is the photograph. To understand how we do this, it helps if we have a little knowledge about how light works. Light rays travel in straight lines and in a single direction. What we see in strong light, whether it's a naturally occurring light like the sun or moon, or an artificial light like fluorescent light, are light rays bouncing off an object and back into our eyes. All these points of light that are reflected off an object align when we are within a visual distance, and then become focused through a lens and interpreted into millions of little points that all join up to make a shape of an object or a subject. While our eyes have the most delicate senses of all in the retina, the digital camera has electronic sensors that record the shapes and colours that we see. How these 3-dimensional images are visually transcribed onto a flat plane is a matter of basic science. During the 15th century, in what is known as the Renaissance period, science and art overlapped one another. Some of the finest painters, like Caravaggio, as artist David Hockney speculated, used a camera obscura, or the first type of camera, to produce photographic-style images of groups of peoples and portraits. Camera obscura means literally darkened chamber or room, and translates to the modern camera as the sealed box that we keep our light-sensitive material in. A hole was placed through a partition that separated 2 ends of the room, and an object at one end would be illuminated. These light rays, which had bounced off the object in front of the room, would travel in a straight line and pass through the hole to the back of the darkened section of the room. The light rays would strike a canvas, and the outline of this would be traced and later filled in by the artist. The recording of the points of light in this circumstance was done manually, but the scientific principle that was used in the camera obscura is exactly the same as our eye and the modern-day camera. The difference being is that the points of light are not manually transcribed, but are captured by a digital sensor. Pinhole cameras also demonstrate the effect perfectly. You can make a pinhole camera by taking a shoebox and literally placing a pinhole in it. If you were to put a light-sensitive material at the back, then place the box in front of an object and keep the hole open, then light will fall on the light-sensitive material and create a photograph. So from a pinhole camera, it is very easy to make the progression to a DSLR. From a box with a hole in it, we have added a lens, an expanding aperture, a shutter and a light sensor, just like the eye. Each of these mechanical components act together in the creation of a photograph. By controlling each of these things, we get to decide exactly what that photograph records and how we can bring our own interpretation of the world into being. Let's briefly look at a DSLR camera and identify the various parts. Here we have the body, the lens, the release button for the lens, the mirror, which covers the shutter, the dial that controls the aperture, and the trigger. In the next few lessons, we will examine how all these components work individually and how together they control exposure.